Rovine, the battle that should never have stopped an empire. In 1395, the Ottoman Empire advanced north across the Danube with 40,000 men. Their objective unmistakably clear. Wallachia was to be erased, and beyond it, the road into Hungary and the heart of Central Europe would finally stand open. Wallachia was small, wedged between Ottoman expansion and the collapsing kingdoms of the north. Its population numbered perhaps 300,000 souls, scattered across marshes, forests, and flatlands that seemed to offer no natural defense. Its army, when gathered, could barely muster 7,000 fighting men. But this land was theirs. They knew its rivers. They knew its forests. They knew which roads turned to mud after rain, and which valleys channeled wind like tunnels. And more importantly, they had a leader who understood that survival did not require defeating 40,000 soldiers. It required making those soldiers wish they had never come. Above all, they refused to kneel. By the end of the 14th century, the people of southeastern Europe were living through a time of fear and uncertainty. The Byzantine Empire, once the great guardian of Christian lands, had collapsed into a shadow of fortified cities clinging to coastlines. Serbia had fallen at Kosovo 6 years earlier, its nobility slaughtered, its independence extinguished. Bulgaria had been absorbed piece by piece, its fortresses now flying Ottoman banners. Survival depended on choice. Many rulers chose submission. They sent tribute, acknowledged Ottoman suzerainty, married their daughters to Turkish commanders, and kept their thrones by becoming vassals. It was a logical decision. The Ottoman military machine seemed unstoppable, its janissaries disciplined beyond anything Christian armies could field, its cavalry swift and brutal, its siegecraft patient and thorough. Mircea the Elder, voivode of Wallachia, chose differently. He had ruled for nearly 2 decades, navigating between Hungary to the north and the Ottomans to the south, through alliances, payments, and carefully calculated defiance. He paid tribute when necessary. He withheld it when possible. He sheltered refugees from fallen kingdoms and maintained contact with powers that still resisted Ottoman expansion. From the Ottoman perspective, this was unacceptable. Wallachia sat directly on the route into Hungary. Its lands controlled the southern approaches to the Carpathian passes. As long as Mircea remained independent and unpredictable, the northern frontier remained insecure. Sultan Bayezid I, called Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for his speed in war, had spent years consolidating his grip on the Balkans. Christian princes who resisted were crushed. Christian princes who submitted were controlled. Mircea did neither consistently enough. By 1395, Bayezid decided he could no longer wait. He prepared a military campaign to bring Wallachia under absolute control once and for all. Long before the Ottoman army began to march, the signs of war were already everywhere. In Adrianople and Plovdiv, Sipahi cavalry assembled by the thousands, their horses fed and shod, their weapons sharpened and oiled. Janissary units drilled in formation outside fortress walls. Supply trains were organized with the efficiency of an empire that had conquered its way across 2 continents. Scouts were dispatched to map roads and identify river crossings. Local Christian vassals were ordered to provide guides, food, and auxiliary troops. The preparation followed a familiar rhythm. Ottoman campaigns were not improvised raids, but calculated invasions supported by logistics, intelligence, and overwhelming force. Nothing in the reports from Wallachia caused doubt. The principality was small, its defenses minimal, its army outnumbered nearly 6 to 1. The campaign was expected to last weeks, perhaps a single month if resistance collapsed quickly. They expected fear to move ahead of the army. Across the Danube, Wallachia prepared in silence. Mircea did not call up his army and march south, to meet the Ottomans at the border. Instead, he issued orders that must have seemed strange to anyone unfamiliar with the land. Villages within 20 miles of expected invasion routes were evacuated. Livestock were driven north into the hills. Grain stores were emptied and hidden or burned if they could not be moved. Wells in strategic locations were poisoned or filled with stones. Bridges were weakened or destroyed entirely. Roads were blocked with felled trees. Mircea's soldiers did not gather in one place. They dispersed into small units of 50 to 100 men, commanded by boyars who knew the local terrain intimately. Scouts were sent south in waves, watching Ottoman movements, counting troops, identifying commanders, and reporting back through relay chains that covered hundreds of miles in days. Mircea was not waiting for the enemy to arrive. He was shaping the way they would arrive. His strategy was not based on holding ground. It was based on denying the enemy everything they needed to sustain an army in hostile territory: food, water, shelter, rest, information. The Ottomans would find none of these things easily, and every attempt to secure them would cost blood. The Wallachian forces were not preparing to win a single great battle. They were preparing to survive, and to make survival unbearable for the invaders. As the Ottoman army moved deeper into Wallachia, the war did not begin with a great battle. It began with tension. The first villages the Ottomans entered were empty. Doors hung open. Hearths were cold. Storehouses had been stripped bare. There were no terrified peasants to intimidate, no supplies to requisition, no guides to interrogate. Just silence and the sound of boots on dirt roads leading north into forests and marshes that seemed to stretch endlessly. The commanders were not immediately concerned. Empty villages were common in warfare. Populations fled. Supplies could be brought up from the rear. The army pressed forward with absolute confidence. Then the small attacks began. An Ottoman scouting party of 20 horsemen rode ahead to survey a river crossing. They did not return. Their bodies were found 3 days later, stripped of weapons and armor, throats cut. A supply column moving through a narrow valley was struck at dawn by archers firing from tree lines on both sides. 40 men died in minutes. The attackers vanished into the forest before cavalry could respond. A janissary detachment sent to secure a village for use as a forward base arrived to find the wells poisoned and the buildings burned. That night, while they slept in their camp, arrows fell from the darkness. Sentries were killed quietly. Tents were set ablaze. By the time the unit organized a defense, the attackers were gone. This was not the war the Ottomans had prepared for. The terrain around Rovine was not a single battlefield. It was a maze of rivers, forests, wetlands, and low hills that fragmented movement and obscured vision. Roads that appeared solid in dry weather turned to thick mud after a single rainstorm. Forests dense enough to hide entire companies of men pressed close to every path. The rivers Argeș and Teleagen carved the land into compartments where large formations struggled to maneuver. The Wallachian fighters used this terrain like a weapon. They struck at dawn when Ottoman soldiers were groggy and disorganized. They struck at dusk when visibility faded and nerves frayed. They struck during rainstorms when arrows came from mist and sound was swallowed by wind. They struck at night when fires became targets and darkness became cover. An Ottoman unit would move forward along a road. The Wallachians would let them pass. Then they would attack from behind, cutting off retreat, killing the rear guard, and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. Another Ottoman detachment would camp near a river. The Wallachians would cross upstream under cover of darkness, strike the camp from an unexpected direction, and fade back into the wilderness before dawn. Supplies were taken, horses were killed, messengers were ambushed. The Ottoman army was not stopped by a single engagement. It was slowed by 1,000 small wounds. By this stage, both sides were clearly suffering. The Wallachian forces were exhausted. Their attacks required constant movement through hostile terrain, often on little food and less sleep. They had no fortified positions to fall back to, no supply depots that were not at risk of being overrun. Men were wounded and could not always be recovered. Ammunition ran low and had to be scavenged from the dead. Every attack risked capture or death, and there were no reserves to replace losses. But the Ottomans were suffering more. Their advantage in numbers meant nothing when those numbers could not be concentrated effectively. Their discipline meant nothing when the enemy refused to stand and fight. Their supply lines stretched longer every day, and every convoy sent south was vulnerable. Soldiers began sleeping in armor. Officers stopped sending small patrols because too many did not return. The army slowed to a crawl, moving cautiously through terrain that felt hostile even when no enemy was visible. Fear spread, not the sudden terror of battle, but the grinding anxiety of never feeling safe. The sense that eyes were always watching, that every tree line concealed archers, that every shadow might hold a knife. Ottoman soldiers stopped straying from their units. They stopped gathering firewood alone. They stopped sleeping soundly. Neither side could break away. Neither side could end the fighting. The decisive moment had not yet arrived, but it was getting very close. As the fighting dragged on, Ottoman commanders slowly realized one clear truth. They were no longer winning. The campaign had begun with absolute confidence. 40,000 men would sweep through Wallachia, crush resistance, and install a compliant vassal. Weeks had passed and the army had advanced, but it had not conquered. It occupied no secure bases. It controlled no supply routes. It had won no decisive victory that broke the enemy's will. The first cause of failure was exhaustion. The Ottoman soldiers were among the best trained and most experienced in the world. But even the best soldiers have limits. Constant vigilance drains energy faster than marching. Interrupted sleep compounds fatigue. The tension of expecting attack at any moment wears down nerves until simple tasks become difficult and judgment falters. Men stumbled on easy ground. Sentries dozed at their posts. Units moved sluggishly, no longer with the disciplined precision that characterized Ottoman forces. The second cause was hunger. The supply system that had worked brilliantly in previous campaigns began to fail. Convoys from the south were harassed, delayed, or destroyed. Foraging parties returned empty-handed from stripped villages and burned fields. The Wallachians had removed or destroyed everything edible within a day's march of Ottoman positions. Soldiers ate half rations, then quarter rations. Horses weakened. Morale, sustained in part by the assumption of inevitable victory, began to crack. The third cause was confusion and the loss of direction. The Ottomans had entered Wallachia expecting to face an army. Armies could be located, engaged, and defeated. Instead, they faced an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. Scouts reported sightings. Forces were dispatched. By the time they arrived, the enemy had moved. The Wallachians struck not to hold ground, but to inflict casualties and withdraw. Ottoman commanders could not predict where the next attack would come from or what its objective would be. Strategy dissolved into reactive defense. Ottoman leaders began asking hard questions. What was the goal of the campaign now? To advance deeper into hostile territory with a weakening army. To hold positions that provided no strategic value. To chase an enemy that refused to fight on Ottoman terms. How much longer could the army endure? How many more men could be lost to ambushes and attrition before the force became too weak to defend itself, much less conquer anything? And what would victory even look like? The final realization came quietly. The Ottoman commanders understood that continuing the campaign risked losing not just the battle, but the army itself. The retreat was tense, but not disastrous. The Wallachians harassed the withdrawing columns, but did not mount major attacks. Mircea understood the calculation. His forces were exhausted, his supplies nearly gone, his men pushed to the edge of what they could endure. The Ottomans were leaving. That was enough, but they did not need to destroy the retreating force. They had already won. The Battle of Rovine was not a great, celebrated victory, with monuments and songs sung for generations. It was not a decisive clash where one side annihilated the other in a single afternoon of glory. It was not even a battle in the traditional sense, with clear lines, mass charges, and a moment when one army broke and fled. But Rovine still mattered because it achieved something that grand battles often do not. It forced an empire to turn back. Mircea did not defeat 40,000 Ottoman soldiers in open combat. That was never the goal. He made Wallachia so costly to conquer that conquest was not worth the price. He used terrain, mobility, and knowledge of the land to turn his weakness into a different kind of strength. Not the strength to win, but the strength to endure. Not the power to destroy an empire, but the will to refuse submission on the empire's terms. For the Ottoman Empire, Rovine was a frustration and a lesson. Wallachia would eventually fall under Ottoman influence, but not in 1395, and not through overwhelming force alone. The campaign demonstrated that numbers and discipline were not always enough when facing an enemy willing to sacrifice everything and fight in ways that nullified conventional advantages. For Mircea and Wallachia, Rovine became a symbol of something that mattered more than victory. It became proof that survival was possible, that a small nation could resist a vast empire if it was willing to pay the cost, that independence, even temporary, was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossibly stacked against it. And sometimes in history, the greatest triumph is not in winning, but in refusing to lose.